Has anything strange slash paranormal slash scary happened to you? And no matter how hard you think about it rationally, you cannot explain what happened? When I was 13, my uncle went out of town and asked me to stay at his place to keep an eye on it. I invited my buddy to come spend the weekend with me, so I wasn't alone. We were hanging out in the attached garage watching TV around 1 AM when I realized I forgot to turn off the pool pump. When we opened the garage door to the backyard, we were flooded with this overwhelming smell of burning meat. Right when I smelt it, I was overcome with a feeling of dread in my gut, told me not to go outside, so we immediately closed the door. As we closed the garage door, my uncle's dog started barking and growling at the other door, which was open and leads into the house. She was barking slash growling into the darkness of the hallway. As we slammed that door shut, the electric dartboard went haywire. It was making all sorts of crazy noises and flashing all of the lights like the entire thing was short-circuiting. Then out of nowhere everything just stopped. The feeling of dread went away, the dog stopped barking at the door, and the dartboard shut off. We did not sleep at all that night, and thankfully my uncle came home the next day. I'm not really sure how to rationalize all three of those things happening at the same time. When I was 12, I had just came home from school, and as usual I was the only person in the house. Siblings at friends, or after school programs, parents at work. Anyways, I walked into my kitchen to grab a snack, and I immediately felt this weird sensation that I've never felt before. I got really sick to my stomach and made my way to the dining area and just collapsed onto a chair. I sat there with my head hanging down when it had just hit me how silent it was. I lifted my head and gazed the room for a bit. After about 20 seconds or so of just pure tense silence and nothingness, I relaxed a bit when out of nowhere this loud noise came from directly beneath my chair. It literally sounded like if paper was being crumbled. I leapt out my chair, and as soon as I did, I just hear what sounded like a little girl giggle, followed by these soft but loud footsteps running down the hallway away from the kitchen towards the front of the house. I slowly backed into the wall behind me without taking my eyes off the door leading to the hallway, and then proceeded to make my way to the back door. Once I reached it, I bolted out of there and ran to my friend's house, which was only 3 houses down from me. I called my mom at work, and she told me to just stay put. That is still the most unexplainable thing to ever happen to me. I was driving along a very remote stretch of road. No houses or population for hours in any direction. Wasn't paying much attention as I wasn't expecting any living soul in the area. However, I ended up passing a woman wearing some kind of white robe. As I passed her, I noticed she was waving her hand as if she was asking to hitch a ride. Half-heartedly I went back. I could still see her in my rear view. I usually don't offer to hitchhikers ride as I'm advised against it by my parents. However, I'd feel really bad to let someone be out there that late. But once I reversed back to her, she was nowhere to be found. I could swear I had her in my rearview mirror the whole time, but there was no trace of her in the end. I was sitting in my classroom in grade school when all of a sudden I had this overwhelming sense of despair hit me out of nowhere. It was like that feeling when your heart drops to your feet, but magnified tenfold. I turned to a girl next to me and told her I feel like something really bad just happened. I learned later that day my brother jumped off a 15-story building literally right before I told my classmate. She found out the next day why I wasn't in class and apparently had to be sent home. I actually talked to her somewhat recently and it still freaks her out. I heard someone singing directly under my bed. There was nothing under the bed that it could have been. Phone, iPod, radio, speaker or whatever. It sounded like a woman literally just laying under my bed singing. I jumped off my bed and looked under and there was nothing, but for some reason the room felt so much darker under the bed. The singing stopped as soon as I jumped off. I haven't heard it since. I lived in what I've come to realize must have been a haunted apartment for 7 years, so I have a lot of these. I know it sounds crazy and you don't have to believe me. I wouldn't if I hadn't lived it, but since you asked, I'll give you the highlights. Small handprints would sometimes appear on the bathroom mirror when I showered. I moved in when I was almost 13, and the only other person who lived there was my mother. The handprints were the size of a child under the age of 10, and they aspirated periodically for the entire time we lived there, and they never got any bigger. for periods of weeks to months at a time. One specific door, the bedroom directly across from the bathroom, would seem to have a mind of its own. We could not make it stay open or closed during these time because it would close and open itself at random. Normally, when this happened, it would move slowly, but on one occasion it slammed itself shut. It wasn't doing it because of a draft or uneven floors, because for 90% of the time we lived there, it was a totally normal door, and it only had 2 to 4 of these rebellious periods. Things would move on their own. Two very notable examples of this were the time a 20 ounces can of peanuts flew clear across the room and scattered peanuts everywhere, and the time the chain of the chain lock started swinging spontaneously and continued to do so for 5 minutes. These things happened in the same week. The building was built in the 1930s, so there was no central ventilation. We had 2 window unit air conditioners. That's it. I would get scratches from nothing. Most of them I could explain away, but a few were unexplainable, such as the scratch on my thigh that I got while in gym class while surrounded by people, none of whom saw anything unusual, and the cut all the way across my wrist that showed up when I was putting shampoo in my hair. There were a lot more too, but this is already pretty long, so I'll leave it there for now. One of my best friends in high school and I used to drive to all the haunted spots we could find in our state. Sometimes we'd get other people to come and sometimes alone. Creepy stuff happened a lot, but it was usually us just being on edge and most could be explained away. One thing happened though that I will never forget and I can never find a logical reason for. One night and I were alone playing our little game, but this time we stuck to our own town. We were heading to a bridge that is known for creepy stuff happening and we were passing through a neighborhood we had both been in a million times before. It was a quiet and darker neighborhood filled with only houses. She turned on a street, again that I had been on before, and there was a gravel road into woods in front of us. I said something like, "What the hell, I don't remember this?" And she was dead silent and drove onto the gravel and into the trees. We were driving, and there were turns and curves, but this gravel road and trees were all that was around. I kept saying I was confused, this wasn't supposed to be where we were, and my friend was agreeing. We had been in this area countless times and there were any woods or gravel roads. I felt so uneasy. She gave me her phone and told me to pull up Google Maps and see where it said we were. It wouldn't pin our location, and I was pretty much all but crying and hyperventilating at this point. We drove for a while and couldn't find any roads leading out or where we came from. Finally after forever we got out of it and she just kind of silently took me home. The next day we decided to go find it again. Took the exact same roads and there was nothing there. The neighborhood was normal. If I was alone, I would have chalked it up to falling asleep or losing my damn mind, but we were both together and the exact same thing happened. Whenever I tell people about it, I'm not sure they believe me but it still gives me goosebumps. Nothing overtly scary happened while in these woods, but they 100% weren't supposed to be there. One summer evening, when I was about 10 years old I had a friend over and we were playing frisbee in my yard until it got too dark to see. So we sprawled out in the grass and talked, waiting for my grandmother to come out and yell that she needed to go home. We were sitting side by side, both facing down my street. I lived in town so there were several street lights illuminating parked cars and at least part of people's front yards. We noticed that there was a silhouette of a person, probably a man, walking toward us up this street. We took particular note of this man because he was walking in the middle of the street and this was small town America, so the street was really wide. That he was in the exact middle, all alone, at night, had drawn our attention. He was approaching a well-lit intersection just a block away from my house when a car drove past on the perpendicular street at a quick pace, maybe 50 miles per hour. The dude who had been walking up the middle of the street just straight up vanished. He was there walking, we were both watching him, and then poof, gone. There weren't parked cars, bushes, or other objects right where he had been when the car drove past, so it seemed unlikely that he could have ducked behind something that quickly, or gone in a different direction, and gotten out of sight that fast. And anyway, why would he? It surprised us so much that we looked at each other and then sprinted into the house. This alerted my grandma, who insisted that I take my friend home. She lived several blocks away and had ridden her bike over earlier. We protested but gave in, and I rode with her to her house, said goodnight, and set out as fast as I could to get back home. As I turned onto my street I was pedaling along and scanning for unusual things because I was a bit freaked out, and I noticed that on the ground just beneath one of the street lights there was a shadow of a person. Head, shoulders, 2 arms, torso, 2 legs, clearly a person, but just in the middle of the lit ground, with legs stretching toward the lamppost, but there was no freaking person at the edge of the shadow. I know because I had to ride past this freaking thing, and I was looking all over for the person who was casting the shadow, whipping my head around, like I was crazed or something. The shadow moved a bit as I went past, as if to start a walking motion, but at that point I was all eyes forward, pumping my legs wildly, and focusing on nothing else but my house at the end of the street. I made it home, just left my bike in the driveway, and bolted inside. I thought about what I had seen that evening, but I have only my memory and my friend's memory of a part of it, and nothing else to go off of. I never saw events like this again, so who knows? Just my imagination, maybe. Like the video and subscribe or you will be haunted by the paranormal.